Yes, it's in English. Okay. Okay. All right. So then I'm still gonna give you some feedback on the writing, but anyways, here we go. Oh, and then there's also some links here. I'll post those links. You can post those links in the chat too, actually, if you want. Okay. It was, oh, this is a project to practice your English. So it's posting. Got you. Got you. Got you. Okay, cool. Well, I'm excited. I am excited. Chapter 1. Thunder rumbles overhead. Two boys, injured and dying, crawl towards one another. The fight in the background is almost muted to their enhanced hearing as they hear nothing but their frantic heartbeats. Seconds feel like hours as they drag themselves across the ground. Finally reaching one another, they prop themselves up against a collapsed wall and grasp each other's hand, intertwining the appendages lazily dragging against the ground behind them. They're both growing numb, and they know the end is near. So as the two feel their consciousnesses fade, they use the last of their energy to turn their heads towards one another. They don't notice the camera trained on them, nor do they hear the anguished screams of their classmates. All they see and all they hear is one another and their weakening heartbeats. And so, with people, be they family or guardians, heroes or villains, fighting all around them, two boys close their eyes with lazy smiles on their faces and take their last breath. The entire world watches, be it through the television or in person, as their lives fade away. The entire world watches as their hearts stop beating. The entire world watches as their chests stop rising. The entire world is gripped with emotions as the boys perish on the cold ground, accompanied only by each other. Because the entire world realizes that this is real. This isn't just a bad dream you would wake up from. But the fighting goes on. A brother, only in blood, fights against the killer of the family's heir. He had attacked the other boy, his brother's friend, and his opponent's treasured fruit, as soon as his own was struck down, an eye for an eye in a sense. Now both are dead, and the fight goes on. A hero fights against arch-nemesis, ferocity and anger in his every blow, anger at himself as well as his enemy, for allowing two boys to die. The anger fuels his strength, but it also makes him sloppy. His enemy gets past his guard and lands a blow to a wound never healed. The cameras are trained on him as he falters. He is forced back. He can't get his guard back up as he is hammered with punch after slash after kick. He stumbles, his body seemingly deflated in front of the entire world to reveal his true form. His opponent gloats about the reveal, about his strength and the hero's weakness. Lightning flashes in the sky. His opponent goes in for the final blow. Thunder rumbles overhead. And the world explodes in a flash of light. Flashback. A dark figure could barely be seen jumping across the gap between two rooftops, traveling along unperturbed as if the gap didn't even exist in the first place. They were constantly aware of their surroundings, having learned from experience what can happen when one doesn't pay attention to everything around them, ever since they started partaking in this activity, since they were a meager 11 years old. Or were they 10 at the time? The figure couldn't quite remember. A shout rippling through the night tore them out of their thoughts. Their body immediately began turning to run towards its source. Another scream, this one tainted with pain, was enough cause for them to break into a sprint, jumping across rooftops and occasionally firing a mechanical grappling gun to gain height and swing across larger streets. Peering into a dark alleyway, illuminated only by the flickering streetlight near its entrance, they could very clearly make out a criminal wearing a paper bag over their head, holding a civilian at knife point. Another mugging. That makes 4 tonight. Dropping down from the roof, the figure made sure to turn on their body cam, recording the fight that was sure to break out. If they were ever caught, proving that they technically acted in self-defense could be crucial, especially since they technically couldn't be charged with vigilantism. The mugger's arm shimmered in the dim light coming from the defective street lamp, revealing smooth scales as they moved their arm to hold the knife closer to their victim, enticing them to hand over their valuables. A reptile mutation, most likely. Definitely not fish scales, but corks can be weird. Most likely a weakness to the cold. A good habit to have. Analyzing an opponent's weaknesses and strengths could be detrimental in a fight. Thankfully, they had rather quickly gotten rid of their habit of mumbling their thoughts out loud, after having been caught and injured because of it one too many times. Stepping closer, the figure made sure to slightly kick an empty can nearby, causing the man to whirl around and attack merely on instinct. The figure easily slipped around the knife being thrust at them, slamming their elbow into the jaw of the criminal. A swift kick to the temple managed to knock the man unconscious, and since the man had attacked first, he could argue it was self-defense if it ever came to it. It probably wouldn't, but it was always good to be prepared. Shuffling caught the figure's attention as the victim, a male of about 30 years of age, scrambled up and ran out of the alleyway, phone already in hand to call the police. They didn't even take the money the criminal had taken from them, instead just fleeing. The figure just shrugged to themselves as they tied the criminal up with a piece of rope from the belt around their waist. It saved them from the phone call and earned them a little money to buy food with. They had to survive somehow, after all. With a sigh, they dragged the criminal to the streetlight, leaving them there for the police to find with a small signed note stuck to their forehead. They stretched their arms above their head and took out the self-built grappling gun, firing it silently and sticking the hook into the top of the building they had jumped down from in the first place. Hitting a button right next to the trigger, the wire began retracting and pulling them upward. Another button loosened the hook, and the figure used the momentum they had gained to easily get onto the rooftop, immediately starting their run once more. Well, that was until a large crack appeared and spread in midair, the noise of the sky shattering and peeling away to reveal a void reverberating through their very soul. This crack grew larger and larger until something or someone shot out of it, falling to the ground. The figure didn't even notice as the crack seemed to piece itself back together, reality repairing itself and fixing the paradox that was created. The crack shrunk, the edges shimmering as the void within receded, before shrinking so far that it could not be seen any longer, and disappearing in a small flash of light and energy. They didn't notice because they were already dashing toward the falling figure, just hoping they would get there in time. Don't mind me, this is to help me later on. A darkness. A black void was all that Kilowatt could see around him. Only one sensation to be felt. He was falling. He realized that quickly as the feeling grew and grew, as though he were getting faster by the second. Though there was no light whatsoever coming from anywhere around him, he could clearly see himself. His memories were hazy, and his head was hurting too much to think clearly, which was saying a lot when one considers his high tolerance to pain. He was still dazedly looking at the darkness around him when he heard a loud crack beneath him. Looking down, a shiver went up his spine. Beneath him was a large crack in the void around him, growing larger and larger, and he was falling right toward it. The scariest part, however, was how high up this crack seemed to be. As soon as he fell through this crack in the void, he wanted to throw up. Everything hit him at once. The noise, the light, even the smell was far too much for him to manage all at once. His vision grew black as blood rushed to his head before going back to normal. The ringing in his ears finally went away as he neared the ground at hazardous speeds, as his body was turned onto its back by the wind. He saw the crack in the sky he had fallen from shimmering at the edges, as if reality itself was fighting to repair the tear that it had formed, and it was succeeding. The crack seemingly shrunk before disappearing in a flash of light and energy, leaving no evidence that it ever even existed behind. Well, except for the footage various cameras owned by civilians still out in the night were recording, surely to be sent to various friends and posted on social media after the spectacle was over. But that really didn't matter to the boy right now. Kilowatt turned his back around and spread out his arms, bending his legs as he stabilized his descent at least a little bit. As soon as his eyes were brought downward again, he realized just how fast he was falling, because he was nearly at the ground now, the roofs of the large buildings only a little below him. He channeled as much Nen as he could to protect himself from the fall, knowing that he would still be knocked out as soon as he made contact with the concrete streets, and braced himself for the pain as he was now only about 25 meters above the ground. Before he knew it, he felt a sharp sting, and everything went black. They had finally made it. It had taken so long, but they finally beat the game straight from hell called Greed Island. It wasn't even a real game. In reality, instead of being sucked into a game, hunters are transported into a large island where they have to collect certain things that will turn into cards. If they manage to get all required cards, they may take any 3 cards back into society, allowing them to use their powers outside of the island. Once they had done it, Gon and Killua beat the game with the help of Bisky, who taught them Nen in their opinion, terrible way. But they had done it, and the reward was right before them, the cards. Taking out the black box he was handed, Gon opened it and handed the blue planet, a beautiful jewel, to Bisky. He took out the other 2 cards and held them in his hands. They were ready. They could find Ging. Gon activated the Paladin's necklace card, the necklace materializing within his hands. He put it around his neck and held out the last card, a disguised accompany card, so they could be sent to Ging in an instant. A small cloud of smoke appeared around the card, and when it was dispelled by the wind, an accompany card was replaced it. They both held the card in their hands, either boy holding one side of the card, and lifted it above their heads. But before they could even try to activate it, they were attacked. It all happened far too quickly. They hadn't been paying attention, too consumed in their own excitement, letting a hooded man sneak up on them. Within an instant, everything around them went black as a red beam struck their bodies. The last thing Killua remembered was his name being called. How no one had noticed the man, you may ask? Plot convenience. Killua awoke with a start, blinking at the shouting around himself and the rain drenching his bloody clothes. His vision was still blurry, and the voices around him seemed distorted. As his vision cleared, his eyes roamed the crowd that had formed around him before settling on the seemingly homeless man trying to talk to him. He could tell there was someone else watching them from nearby, but he couldn't tell where. His head really hurt way too much. Hello, and yeah, are me, can you me how many fingers I'm holding up? The man, straight out of the homeless shelter, asked, unnaturally loud. But the voice was still hard to understand as the ringing in Killua's ears ceased to exist. Slowly he got up, taking in his surroundings, pain shooting through his body as he shifted his weight. Where am I? The white-haired boy asked, voice raspy, ignoring the man's questions. You're in Musutafu, Japan. What's your name, kid? The homeless guy asked right back. Gone? He lied immediately, his mind finally clearing a bit, not really allowing him to think freely, but enough to realize that he had no clue where he was. He didn't want any random person to know just who he was, especially when he had no clue where this Musutafu was and how he even got there. Holy crap, I need to find Gon. He was hit too, and knowing him, he already managed to get himself into trouble. Sorry, old man, but I have to find a friend, so if you'll excuse me. As soon as the boy was standing, he was about ready to bolt away to find his best friend. Well, that was until some gray and hard scarf wrapped around his body. The white-haired boy moved before he could even think about it and was fighting against the grip the scarf had on him. Sickening cracks rang out as Killua dislocated his joints to escape. The fact that the man flinched back and loosened the scarf at the noise certainly helped as the ex-assassin dashed towards the closest building, jumping and latching onto a fire escape bolted to the wall of an alleyway. Whoops. I accidentally just went up. My apologies. Lifting himself up effortlessly. A few moments later, Killua hauled himself onto the building, running off with a start and jumping onto the next roof. Behind him, he heard the nearly imperceivable sound of footsteps as well as the slight rustling of clothes in the wind. The usually white-haired boy, though his hair was certainly dirtier with blood and grime, knew that he was losing quite a bit of blood, especially because he was running injured like this. So honestly, it wasn't that much of a surprise when his vision started to grow dark. And as he landed on the next building, instead of continuing to run, he stumbled to the ground, leaning against the nearby roof access door. The last thing he heard was a shout before everything went black. They were scared, not for their own safety, no, They have long lost their sense of self-preservation, but they were scared for the boy that just collapsed from blood loss after jumping from roof to roof. They were scared the boy wasn't going to make it. They wanted to jump from roof to roof to get there so bad, but alas, Eraserhead was already at the boy's side, stabilizing him and calling for an ambulance. And sure, they could just go over there anyways, but in their own opinion, it wasn't worth it. Eraserhead was clearly engrossed in taking care of the boy's various injuries, and they really don't want to disrupt the man. So when they observed from afar as Eraserhead wrapped the boy in his capture gear and climbed off to the building carefully, making sure not to jostle the boy, they watched as the paramedics loaded the boy onto a stretcher and drove off. They watched as Eraserhead slumped against the closet window. Against the closest wall, exhaustion showing in his every movement. The muffled sound of someone landing next to him startled the hero out of his thoughts. Slip was the simple greeting he gave the person he knew slipped down from the building to land next to him. Slip, the vigilante that has been active for just about 5 years now. The vigilante that Eraserhead saw as nothing less than a son. The vigilante that Eraserhead was sure couldn't be older than the first years he'd been getting when this new school year starts in a few months. He wanted to get the kid away from what he was sure was an abusive or neglectful household, but he also didn't want to overstep their boundaries because he didn't want to scare them away. Eraser, came the reply. Sorry. In a different voice than the last time they spoke. The vigilante wore a mask that surely included a voice changer. It seemingly also displayed their facial expressions through screens built into the metal mask, representing the worried frown the vigilante currently wore with blue lines. The glowing blue eyes also clearly displayed their worry. Eraserhead knew from experience that the colors could change, a feature that came in handy when dealing with criminals. A surprising amount of interrogated criminals spoke of a dim, flickering grin in the darkness, changing from blue to red to blue before they were knocked out. You doing all right, Eraser? I think the answer is obvious. Fair. So what happened, huh? You mean a kid literally falling from the sky in the middle of the night? And said kid then dislocating his joints to get out of my capture weapon? And said kid then climbing onto a roof with ease while injured before jumping over rooftops to get away and passing out from blood loss? No need to be snarky with me, that's my thing. A bitter laugh escaped Eraserhead's lips. God, I really need some good coffee. I'd get you some, but I don't have the money for that. Silence overcame them both as they just listened to the ambient noise of the night around them. The kid's probably going to be in surgery for quite a while. Eraserhead decided to break the silence. You're going to visit him, aren't you? Yep. I have to catch up on some sleep anyways. The Sukachi is probably going to have a lot of questions. Hell, I won't be surprised if this catches Nezu's attention. I fear for the kid's sanity if that's the case. The vigilante got up from the ground. Well, I better get going now. You wouldn't know it, but I actually sleep sometimes. And just like that, Slip was gone again. Okay, I'm going to pause there. Hello. Welcome to the stream, guys. Okay, so I have a lot that I want to say about this. And I'm going to start with, despite you do have some difficulty writing in English, right? So there's some grammar issues, there's occasionally some spelling issues, and there's also occasionally some words that feel almost like they're just the wrong words, which is very normal and it happens all the time. But despite that, this was a lot better than I was expecting. And I don't read fan fiction. Despite its flaws, I was actually very much enjoying the story. So you have something here that I think is valuable, and the storytelling and where you're going with it, I think is really good. Yes, hearing someone else read it is a big help. Yep, reputation, bad words, quite a lot. Yeah, I would say your biggest issue when it comes to your ability of being a writer is you're redundant. So the words and the phrases and the sentences that you use basically just retell what you're already saying, right? So it's like when you have an essay you got to fill 1,000 words for in school, and so you just try and fill those 1,000 words, right? You're trying to hit that word count. A lot of what you're saying in your writing can just be basically eliminated, and you're still saying the exact same thing. You know what I mean? And that can be simple, just like you missed it, you overlooked it, or maybe you just kind of wanted to add on to try and like show emphasis for this one thing, so you're trying to retell it in a different way. It just doesn't end up working. But as I was going through here, I highlighted a few things. And this right here, let me go back to just regular, but I'll highlight it like this, okay? The reason I highlighted this is because it's a really good example of how you're overtelling something that doesn't need to be told, period. Just the nature of the story, the genre of the story that you're writing in. I don't care that it has nothing to do with it being fan fiction or not, right? But this is clearly a high-paced, action-filled story, okay? And when you get to here, with a sigh, they dragged the criminal to the streetlight, leaving them there for the police to find with a small signed note stuck to their head. Okay. They stretched their arms above their head and took out their self-built grappling gun, firing it silently and sticking the hook into the top of the building they had jumped down from in the first place, hitting a button right next to the trigger. The wire began retracting, pulling him upward, another button. I'm not even going to finish. So this is all an example of what is unnecessary. Okay? This is too much. And when you include something like this, it takes the reader out of the story. And that's why I had the idea of highlighting it, because I'm in the story regardless of any grammar issues. I'm reading, I'm into it, I'm feeling it, and then I get to this paragraph and I'm immediately pulled out because it's just a little bit too much. Like, you don't actually need to explain how the grappling gun is working and how the step-by-step process Eraserhead used to use the grappling gun, right? You can just leave it out, right? Yeah, for sure. And I'm not saying, this is all feedback for you when you go back through to fix, right? This is just an example. I'm not necessarily saying that this is like this is like your biggest flaw. I'm just using this specific paragraph as kind of like a template for you to look at and then use as you're editing. I think there's a lot of volume wise, but not enough detail. Yeah, so I think Jade's saying basically kind of similar to what I'm saying. There's a lot here, but some of it might be a little unnecessary, okay? I'm going to skip this. I want to talk about this right here. I thought this was your best, and I highlighted it in a different color because I wanted to remember why I highlighted it. But this is a really, really good example of including information about a character without actually talking about the character. Okay? This line here specifically, sickening cracks rang out as Killua dislocated his joints to escape. The fact that the man flinched back and loosened the scarf at the noise certainly helped as the ex-assassin dashed towards the closest building. So this is phenomenal example of revealing information about a character while using it to the advantage of your story. With this single sentence here and this paragraph, I don't need to know who Eraserhead is. I don't need to know that he's a hero, that he's probably a father, that he looks after kids for a living, right? All I know is that he tried to capture a kid, thought he hurt the kid, and in his response recoiled away and let him go. And that you told me so much there with just that single sentence. Like, that's really good. I just want to highlight that because I think that this specific paragraph here is awesome. And this is such a good example of telling enough in a little. And I want you to try and do this more and get rid of the bloat, because this is great. This I'm gonna I'm gonna unhighlight this. This is just another example of it being slightly redundant that I thought was easy. Like you don't really need to explain too much about the glowing eyes, about the glowing mask. Like kind of one line is enough. Um, and I think that was also the reason why I highlighted this here. Oh, I just highlighted this to remind myself to tell you that like sometimes it can be a little redundant. So just talking about the crack, you talk about it a lot, and I think this is more just like an editing mistake from like a long time ago where you left a sentence in and it just kind of stayed in and you missed it. So not a big deal either. Okay. Um, but all in all, like clearly you know what you're doing when it comes to telling a story, because I'm already into it. I'm already enjoying it. I really am. So keep it up. This is really cool. I didn't know how much I would enjoy a My Hero Academia mixed with Hunter x Hunter story. But like I am, I'm liking it. Like I would keep reading this for sure. I put the details with the mask in there as that will come up pretty often and pretty important later on. Okay, so but you telling me that just confirms my suspicions about the mask. If you're gonna bring up the mask later on, then you don't need to explain so much about it before. Like, talk about the mask, say that it glows, right? But trust that the people who are reading your story are going to be able to infer information, right? Like, your readers aren't idiots, right? Your readers can understand what you're trying to say, right? Most readers are smart enough to pick up on the little bits of information, right? Especially if you're going to be using it later on. If you even bring it up and maybe an additional sentence just to really hammer in the fact that it's important will be good enough. But if you go overboard, then you're kind of, in a way, kind of ruining more of the cool factor of it later on. Because you just told me basically in a whole paragraph about how the mask works, right? You don't necessarily have to do that. Sometimes it's important. In this instance, I don't think it works to your advantage. I feel like there should be more adjectives, if that makes sense, to really hone in the world. Potentially, yeah. Um, yeah, like maybe some description, I think. A description of where they are might do you some good. Just kind of beef it up in the sense that I know I can envision where they are. You did a good job of describing the characters and the crack, the rift in the sky. I thought you described that really great. But maybe the city that they're in could be described a little bit better. Um, but yeah, does that all make sense, Axo? I think that's basically it. Um, if it's really important, there needs to be more said about it. About what specifically? Well, look, I don't want to rip apart the story at all, and I'm not trying to attack your writing in any way because you are clearly, it's German first for you, right? But I know that you care about this. And if this is a project that you're passionate about, then I want it to be the best for you. And I am by no means an expert on writing fan fiction or on writing about Hunter x Hunter or My Hero Academia, right? I'm not an expert, but as a reader and as somebody who's been writing for a long time, this is my personal perception of the story, and I want it to be awesome for you because I want you to succeed.